Hello everyone, and welcome back to my first time reading Bleach. So we spent some time on the other side of the veil in the land of the Hollows, where I've gone through quite the emotional roller coaster. I got to see what might be the best confrontation in the series so far, with the intense, emotional, and surprising battle between Ichigo and Ulquiorra, but immediately after that, we were given the kind of silly Yammy reveal about his real Espada ranking that may or may not have caused me to rant for like 20 minutes. But now we're back to Karakura Town, or at least the decoy Karakura Town, where we are finally given the chance to see the top 3 Espada in action. Wait, am I even allowed to call them that anymore? I don't know. They're still the top 3 as far as I'm concerned, but thanks for complicating things, Yammy. Anyway, Haribel, Baraggan, and Starrk face their respective opponents, so let's get into those duels and some very cool developments within them. Kubo brings us back brilliantly as the other Soul Reapers watch the captains fight the Espada with a mix of awe and absolute terror. The captains and the Espada square off, but things quickly intensify on all fronts, and we get to see a whole lot of transformations too. So let's go through the fights against the Espada that we see in these chapters as we get to really find out what the Soul Reapers are up against. Let's first discuss what we saw of Haribel versus Toshiro Hitsugaya. Her resurrection is pretty sleek, though I really do wish her mouthpiece had remained. It brought a little more threat visually from her, but it's not a big deal. I love the aquatic, water-related aesthetics she has with both this look and her attacks. The sword looking like a fin is awesome, and it's fitting to have a water-centric character against someone who uses ice. That's a fun combination. Her immediately slicing Hitsugaya apart was a shocking page, but I liked his Mortal Kombat Sub-Zero Ice Decoy move to get out of it. That was real sneaky. Real quick side note, but Haribel has got some real gumption to look over at Head Captain Yamamoto of all people and be like, "You're next." I don't know if she thinks she's playing by Pokemon rules, so her water will be highly effective against his fire, but I don't think it'd be that simple. Points to her for wanting to avenge her subordinates though. In general, I usually like the fights we've seen Captain Hitsugaya get, though there haven't been a ton, but I appreciated the back and forth between these two combatants as it turns into like a full water war. There's not really much below the surface with this fight, besides both of these people feeling like the other is underestimating them and trying to prove them wrong. But it leads to an incredible showcase of Hitsugaya's power, as he controls the weather itself to give him an edge and freeze her in a column of ice. Like, his power is really impressive, even if he doesn't yet have full control over it. I mean, he definitely seems like the youngest captain, so I like that he's still learning. And even later when Shunsui says that in another 100 years, Captain Hitsugaya might be stronger than him. It's a great showing from him, and I feel like he was almost talking to the audience about being underestimated. I won't doubt you again, Captain. You're real cool. Okay, Baraggan being up against Soifon and Omaida is an interesting matchup and not one that I expected at all at the start of this battle. I like that Kubo put in the work prior to this to kind of win me over to their characters a bit. That was very necessary for me and endeared me to Soifon and Omaida a little bit more, especially Omaida as a more comedic character. His antics are actually kind of hilarious. Even when he's forced to be a decoy, he's great at it. But Baraggan isn't really playing anymore either. He's not sitting on his throne watching, and he literally turns that throne into a giant battle axe, which is so unnecessarily badass, and I love everything about it. And it's during this fight that Baraggan reveals that each Espada represents an aspect of death, which is an absolutely fascinating concept. I do wish that this had maybe been mentioned sooner, so I could have tried to analyze some of the Espada for their respective aspect as I met them, but this will have to do. A retroactive look could still be a little challenge, so let me try to dive into those aspects of death for a couple minutes, just for fun, to see if I could decipher how accurate or inaccurate they are compared to who they represent. Starting with Ulquiorra. His is nihilism, which is definitely accurate, especially after reading his backstory. That's how his whole view of the world is, only seeing a small glimmer of appreciation for life in his final moments. Makes total sense. Next, we see that Harabel is sacrifice, which is interesting, but I'm not really sure yet how this pertains to her. Maybe she had to give up something to reach the 3rd ranked position? She clearly cares a lot about her underlings, and they kind of got sacrificed in battle a bit? I'm not sure on this one yet, but it's definitely got me curious to learn more about her. Starrk is solitude. Given what I've learned about him in these chapters, this one is very, very interesting, but I'll discuss it more when talking about Starrk in a little bit. Zomari is intoxication. Okay, he definitely didn't seem like a drunken master or anything, and this isn't the word I'd associate with him, but maybe his intoxication had to do with following Aizen. Intoxication with what he believed. More like indoctrination into Aizen's ideals, since he did seem to fully believe in Aizen, like a fanatic, even in his final moments. My guy Grimjow being destruction makes a lot of sense. Obviously, he always had a pretty chaotic and destructive personality. He loves to fight and use violence to prove himself, and sometimes his actions led to his own destruction too, like his act of rebellion that got his gang killed, as well as causing him to temporarily lose an arm. Yeah, I'd say it fits him pretty well. I still hope he's instrumental in Aizen's destruction down the line too. Neutra being despair, I kind of see beneath the surface of all of his envy and his pettiness. He even talked about how he wanted to die. It's kind of the underlying condition of his existence that leads to all of the other symptoms, trying so hard to prove himself and his worth in like the most toxic ways that he possibly can. Yammy being rage is accurate, especially lately when he hulked out and transformed. He is absolutely someone that's driven by anger and raw emotions instead of keeping them in check like his buddy Ukiura. His rage is his power, for better or worse. Eren Yarrow is greed, which is absolutely true. His whole existence was about absorbing things into his being, including like thousands upon thousands of hollows. His growth was dependent on what he stole from others, and to keep on taking as time went on. Yeah, I'd say that greed fits him ridiculously well. And lastly, Xyloporo is insanity. For a mad scientist who was absolutely crazy, that definitely checks out. All in all, I think a lot of these are really fitting, some more than others, but it adds a nice little extra layer for a lot of them, and makes me very curious about a couple of them too. Back to Baraggan, whose aspect of death is aging, which is essentially the core of all that he is on all levels as a character. His abilities pertaining to this are crazy. Like, he can make things around him rapidly age, grow old and brittle and decay pretty much instantly, which is terrifying. And then Baraggan transforms. And no exaggeration, it might be the coolest looking thing I've seen so far in all of Bleach. It's right up my alley. I have been waiting for a hollow to take the place of my beloved anglerfish hamster, a character that is unsettling, disturbing, and now I think I've found him. Baraggan is the coolest, a crotchety old guy that isn't afraid to laugh sometimes when he's being scary. This design is so beautifully simple and unlike anything else we've seen from Resurrection so far. Baraggan isn't growing wings or arms or sprouting additional armor or enlarging to immense sizes. He just turns into a skeleton, like he's death itself, and with a touch that can make someone expire immediately, he pretty much is death itself. And most of all, this design is just metal as hell. He looks like he belongs on an album cover. Skeletal monarchs are always such a vibe, and we've seen how the Espada's transformations kind of play into their characters. Thematically, this kind of imagery speaks to fallen kingdoms and shattered empires. It's regal and haunting and badass, and I love it so much. With how his fracciones refer to him as an actual king. Some of them call him a god. Is this guy the king of all hollows? Because that's what it feels like, and I want that to be true so bad. Or at least a particular hollow kingdom. And I love how Baraggan's design, both before and after the resurrection, really highlights his aspect of death. He initially appears as an old man that practically wears his experience on his face. He's got scars all over, but when he transforms, the skin disappears disappeared, and he's left as most people will eventually be left, nothing but bone. Kubo did a great job meshing his powers and his design with what he represents. He should seem scary in such a familiar way, like death incarnate is encroaching on our heroes, threatening to end their lives in the same way that a majority of people's lives will end, by growing old. Initially, he feels unstoppable and inevitable, like aging itself. The moment that really stuck with me since first seeing it was Soifon's hand immediately turning skeletal, and it starts to spread up her limb, forcing her to have Omaida remove her arm before the decay can spread any further. This was such a viscerally terrifying scene for me, and seeing the real fear in Soifon's eyes just made it so much worse. She's usually pretty even-keeled, sometimes straight up overconfident, but there was none of that here. She recognizes how scary Baraggan's presence is, which makes it even easier for us as readers to feel that fear too. He barely has to do anything, and his enemies wither away. But Soifon also unleashes her Bankai, which is a straight up missile, which is equal parts hilarious and really cool, and I love how it goes against everything that she's usually good at by having like the loudest weapon ever when she's supposed to be all about stealth. I think that's amazing. But of course, that Bankai missile wasn't gonna be enough, because guys, I'm sorry, maybe it's biased because I just got instantly converted into a Baraggan fanboy, but this power seems so insane compared to most of his peers. Like, I'm not trying to really downplay anyone, a lot of the Espada are absolutely dangerous in their own ways, but like, Neutra's resurrection gives him a few extra arms. Yammy's makes him really big. Yes, these improve their capabilities and their deadliness, but they kind of pale in comparison to someone being able to force you to age to death with a touch or with a breath. It seems so much more impressive conceptually than some of the others. Like, this is really scary power here that isn't something you can physically fight. Even Starrk's first showcase once he's transformed was that he had Sero guns, which is awesome, but Baraggan takes away vitality with a touch. Starrk's got a gun. You see what I mean? But I'm sure Starrk has more to offer as the number one, but Baraggan just blew me away with just how intimidating he was. But speaking of Starrk and his Sero guns, let's get into that fight. I've talked about how much I enjoy this matchup with how Shunsui and Starrk are two similarly chill individuals that don't really want to fight, but once they get into it, it's great to see them both start to put in some real effort. I especially like that Starrk only really got interested once he saw Bankais in action and wants to see what Shunsui is capable of. And to try to get him to do this, Starrk releases his own resurrection, which doesn't have to do with his Zanpakuto, but is instead based around his one underling that we've seen, Lilynette. Since when he releases his power, in order to do that, the two of them have to merge into one, which is wild and completely unexpected. I wouldn't have thought these two would fuse together. But Lilynette being a part of Starrk, or like the two of them being two halves of the same whole, is shocking and completely unlike anything I've seen before in the series so far. I'm very curious about this ability. Is it like aspects of him, like his personality got severed and split away? Is she just a part of him? Or is it just a part of his power that he personified in a separate being? What is Lilynette is I guess what I'm asking. Her own person, or is she just a projection of a piece of Starrk? Are they both two halves of one whole, or is Starrk the majority, since when they merge he's much more Starrk than Lilynette in appearance? I don't know, but there's a lot of interesting questions this brings up, and I'm really hopeful to get some answers at some point. And we do see that Starrk and Lilynette apparently retain some of the individualism between them once they've merged, which leads me to think that she might not just be a part of Starrk, since it feels more like two entities sharing the same body. I don't really know which way it's leaning yet. Is she the guns? Did she like transform like Megatron used to do into a gun for someone else to use, like in Transformers back in the day? Or like, is this a younger Toguro, elder Toguro situation where she turned into his weapon? I'm really not sure which way this is leaning yet, and we don't get a chance to dive too heavily into it in these chapters, so I'm hoping in the future we will. But I really like his resurrection design though. It's nothing drastic, but I like the eyepiece and that fancy coat with all the fur lining. He looks fittingly like a gunslinger, which I really like. But like I talked about earlier, Stark's aspect of death is apparently solitude or loneliness, and now knowing about this part of his story, it warrants extra attention. I wouldn't have thought much about it before. I would have been like, oh, Stark's scared of being alone, which could be true, but now that I know that a piece of himself is who keeps him company, it takes on a whole new meaning. Because even when he's not alone and he's with Lilynette, he's still by himself in a way, apparently. I'm just so curious to get a real explanation for this. But for now, after merging, Starrk just starts attacking with Sero guns, which, despite me joking earlier, they seem pretty effective. Shunsui is supported by Ukitake, who uses his own abilities to not only reflect the blasts back, but to send them back with even more force. It really fits what we've seen from Ukitake as a person. He's kind of reserved and gentle, so I like that his strength is coming from turning his enemy's power back against them. It's good stuff, and I called that these two buddies would be fighting together. Not quite as closely as Starrk and Lilynette, that would be wild. It's essentially 2-on-2 still. They also reference Shunsui's mysterious Bankai that he's hesitant to use and that Ukitake doesn't think should be used where everybody can see it. What a tease. I need to see it. Is it flower related? I picture it's flower related. It's gonna be flower petals. It's gonna be like George Descend and G Gundam shooting flower petals. I'm sure of it. Rose Bits. Does anybody remember Rose Bits? Does anybody remember G Gundam? Anyway, and then Wonderwise. Wonderwise, I never know which way to say it. I'm gonna go with Wonderwise today. In another video I may have said Wonderwise. Wonderwise makes his grand return. This has been a very intriguing character to me despite not showing up all that much. He's the only Arankar we've actually seen be created by the Hogyoku, at least from what I remember, and he acts very strangely, even in combat last time we saw him. I've been wondering how he was going to be utilized since he wasn't one of the Espada, but Kubo had taken the time to show us his creation and give him a little bit of focus before, so there had to be something. And Wonderwise continues to be weird and apparently powerful as he instantly punches a hole through Ukitake with no effort at all. He just one-shots a captain. And yeah, Ukitake's a little sickly sometimes, but he one-shots a captain in a little sneak attack. And then frees the Espada from their current conditions just by screaming. He seems extremely powerful, and Starrk even comments that Wonderwise's arrival means that Aizen has run out of patience. So Wonderwise is apparently a last resort or a secret weapon. Whatever the case, his power is fascinating, especially when it comes to where he sits power-wise among the Espada. And that's not even all, because he also brings this giant monster thing from a rift, and it's pointed out that it is the one whose eye was visible when Aizen abandoned the Soul Society. You know, in the background of those panels, that like slit eye. I remember wondering about that at the time and then kind of completely forgot about it, but it's wild to see the actual being behind that cyclopean eye, and immediately Wonderwise and this creature get to work. The Espada that were in danger are freed, and worst of all, Aizen, Tozin, and Gin are no longer trapped by the fire after the monster disperses the flames with a breath. So, yeah. Things are taking a bit of a turn for the worse for our Soul Reapers in the living world. Everything is really shifting in Aizen's favor until we get a fantastic moment of receiving reinforcements. And it's the kind of backup that I've been waiting for. The Visored have finally arrived to the battle, and they've got some scores to settle. These were some great chapters, and I love that we finally got to see more of the top 3 Espada in action, especially Baraggan, who was absolutely awesome, and I love him so much. He should be number 1. I'm sorry, he should be. I'm sure Starrk has some awesome moves still, but Baraggan just feels like the number 1. I've always said it, and I'm still gonna say it. He's the best. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and if you want to help support the channel a little bit more, a membership option is now available. So, I'll see you guys soon to hopefully see the Visored get some long overdue vengeance. Take care. Bye-bye.